It's really a pleasure here to have Dr. J.P. Warner. We look forward to hearing your wisdom.
All right, thank you. I'm going to apologize in advance because I have a right brain, and there are lots of left brains in this audience here. The other thing I'm going to apologize for is that whatever I tell you, I am 100% certain that whatever it is, somebody knows better what I'm presenting than I do. The other part of it is that I've never presented such a varied group because we have doctors here, we have PhDs here, we have tech people here, we have finance people here, etc. So imagine how difficult it is for me to present to all those people on one topic. So the topic I chose was innovation in orthopedics because, of course, this was about orthopedics. But I want to spend a little time talking about the context of that innovation, where we do it and how we do it and the barriers and this sort of thing. First of all, just by disclosure, I'm an analog guy. So I grew up before electric typewriters, and I did organic chemistry with a slide rule. So Google didn't exist. So please bear with me as I show you my learning curve. And when I got invited to do this, I felt a little like this guy here because of all the people that are likely going to be watching this. So bear with me. So this is a mural I saw on a wall when I was in Jerusalem, and I thought, what a great way to introduce myself if I have to. And the reality is that was overdone introduction because my kids would laugh with that. And about the only thing I have in common with Einstein is that, like him, I'm curious. After that, there's nothing else that we share. Just to show you, this is a little bit downstream for me, but in my learning curve, this is a Harvard Business Review item I picked up when I was going to HBS. And, it says the hard truth about innovation. And it's really hard. And all you founders out there, I have tremendous empathy for what you do because it's unbelievably lonely and stressful on a personal and professional level to endure what you all endure. I'm going to talk about a little bit of that because what I do is I'm also a mentor. And a lot of founders are young and they don't know how to deal with the stress of what they go through. And it's important that they do to be successful. So what I learned at HBS was before you innovate, you got to innovate yourself and the others around you. And technology is really important, but it's care delivery and business models that I think I bring to the table. And if you look back at things, at least to tell you who I am, and it's a little embarrassing to go over these things, but from 1994 to present, I've been on 4 arthroscopy design teams dating back to the beginning of arthroscopy with a number of companies you would know, and 5 different arthroplasty design teams, including 2 I sued for breach of contract. So I've had a lot of experience with industry. So I thought I would break down for you companies that I've been involved with, either in the past or ongoing, by country. And so the first company I really had much to do with was a company named Tenet Medical Engineering, and some of you may know the spider arm holder. A very simple product that solved a major problem that nobody wanted until we finally got a licensing agreement, and then we sold it after bootstrapping it for a pretty good value. And then I have some of these others here. France has been pretty friendly for me. Imiscap, which I'll talk about in something of a case study at the very end, is worth considering because it was the first time I'd ever really gotten engaged with digital healthcare and the practical elements of what we do in orthopedics and some really, really brilliant software engineers. Then in the US, I had a number of companies. Most of you will be familiar with ViewMedi. ViewMedi's had a secondary investment. And by the way, every company that's circled here has had an exit or a secondary investment. And the others are ongoing. And there's one here that just is signing the papers for an exit, but I can't tell you which one because it's not finalized. So you can guess when you look at these. Israel's been an unbelievable place to work with. There's something about Israelis that's quite remarkable. They're the most resilient people you can imagine. They go from bomb shelter and air raids back to a conference call. And OrthoSpace was one of my companies, and now I have a number of other innovative companies that span digital technology all the way to implants and non-disposable items. And then Switzerland, I have a company, and then actually in Singapore, I have a company, and somewhere out there, maybe Abi may be here, but there's Abi. One of my founders is here from Singapore, and I just met another friend from Singapore. So a little bit about my journey. You heard about the academic part of it. So that was it. When I first went into what I do, I wanted to be an academician, and I had a great boss, and I don't have time to go over how important that is for you. And then I spent my time with clinical expertise, becoming a better surgeon and a mentor and a teacher, and then I got the knack or the feeling or the desire to learn about business. And all my kids laughed at me, and you'll see why in a minute, because they thought I was too old to learn anything new, which made me feel like I lived in the box of shame from the standpoint of my family, because they didn't think I'd ever amount to anything. At least that's in retrospect now. So with all I just showed you, past performance is no guarantee of future results. So I want to show you a little bit about how I think about things. And I never realized, but it was Confucius who said, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. That's been attributed to many people. So here's to the founders. These are many of the founders, and there's so many more than these because the CEOs and the others that work in these brilliant group of people make my life wonderful. And my job is to make their life wonderful too. So Warren Buffett said, if you're in a boat, never test the depth of the river with both feet. And so I've been pivoting for some time, and one foot's wet and the other one's getting a little more wet as we go along. And I never really used social media before, but I figured, well, I might say something on LinkedIn that defines my passion and purpose. And so I look for some quotes that would be it. And I really like Einstein, and I like this quote about becoming a man of value rather than a man of success, because if making money is your number one priority, you will fail. It should be somewhere down lower, maybe closer to 10. And it's the process and the journey that makes the difference. And as well, my purpose is delivering value to everybody I work with, which is what I try to do with the founders. Now, I'm also a fan of history, and E. Emery Codman was probably one of the first entrepreneurs, well, not entrepreneur, innovator, there's a difference. And more than 100 years ago, these are the things he innovated. The end result concept, which was the beginning of value-based healthcare, the first anesthesia record, a book on hospital efficiency. He co-founded the American College of Surgeons, the first person to use x-rays for fracture treatment, a tumor registry, and the first book in English on the shoulder. Now, he wasn't a very good entrepreneur, and as you'll see in a moment, he died a penniless pauper and was buried in an unmarked grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery. And here's that grave, because in 2012, the American College of Surgeons and the American Shoulder Elbow Society and even the Department of Surgery at Mass General put a gravestone marker there. And if you can't read it, but here's what it says. It may take 100 years for my ideas to be accepted. So warning to founders that are too far ahead of their time. You may not be buried in an unmarked grave, but you may run out of money before the market is ready for you. And that's just something to be aware of when you look at really novel ideas. The other thing I want to mention is nobody does it alone, and this is my family. The two tallest guys, one is a son-in-law, and the other one is hopefully soon a son-in-law. And so my kids are really smart. This one here does financial strategy for DeepMind. This one here used to be with BCG in graphic design and now produced a granddaughter for us. This one's my wife. She's smarter than all of them together. This one here is my daughter in VC healthcare, and that's my son in private equity healthcare as well. And my brother's here, one of my two brothers is here, and Keith has been a very successful gaming entrepreneur, and now he sometimes works as a coach for CEOs and founders. And my brother Douglas first, at one point, had the title as Chief Futurist at Hewlett-Packard, and now he's in Amazon Web Services and does everything AI. And they all set me straight when I don't know things. Fortunately, I have them to help me. So in 2012, I decided after Tenet Medical was bought, I better learn something more about healthcare and business. So I went to this value-based healthcare seminar that Michael Porter put on, and he was a very well-known, very, very famous and brilliant man who was an economist. And here he is in front of me. There I am in the circle there. And these are all physicians from around the world. That got my start, and caused me to create Boston Shoulder Institute, which is another story altogether. And then I read this article by Regina Hersinger, who's known as the godmother of healthcare, business and healthcare. And she wrote an article, Why is Innovation in Healthcare So Hard? And I actually took her course. She wrote this great book, too, that's really required reading if you want to innovate in healthcare. And I took her course on innovations in global healthcare, and here I am here, and everybody else is a VC. So I was really a fish out of water in trying to learn things. And you got to be uncomfortable if you want to learn anything. And finally, I asked Michael Porter, I really want to do a bigger deal here. I want to learn about business and how it works. And here I am in the executive program that I took there that basically my interview was a phone call from him. And then I got into this program. And I love their mission, which is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. And one of my beliefs is that you're a better leader oftentimes without a title, because titles constrict you in what you do to help others. And so here I am here, and 55% of my colleagues or my classmates were from around the world, and almost nobody was in healthcare. So I wanted to understand how business worked outside of healthcare to bring some of those things into healthcare, because healthcare isn't doing a very good job figuring itself out. And these are some of my teachers. I can tell you at my age, this was the best educational experience I've ever had, and certainly has the most impact any way you want to measure the ROI. So I got thinking about the move from Codman to Michael Porter and the promise of value, and that connects with innovation. And so Codman drew this cartoon of a balloon floating away with the end result being the value that was measured that really wasn't being measured by people. And when I considered this, I realized that we weren't measuring it either. So if you don't know what value is, how will you innovate anything? And the bigger problem is in healthcare, how do you satisfy all of these individuals that in many cases are in a multi-directional tug of war with each other? How do you create value for all these stakeholders? Because the more you get, the more likely your venture is going to be successful and supported rather than resisted. And this is a picture of Michael and I about 10 years ago in front of a mural of Codman outside my old office. And it got me thinking about what my approach should be in terms of my value-based agenda for innovation. And first and foremost, it had to do with measurement, and of course, considering new technology and methods, and then improvement of care delivery and experience, bending the experience curve to reduce errors, bending the cost curve for sure, improving efficiency for improved access to care, being profitably minded, and so think about margin more than revenue, and what is a sustaining innovation rather than a disruptive innovation, aligning the stakeholders, as I already said, risk stratifying, so you don't put together apples and oranges because some are harder than others to scale, so start with the easier one first and move to the harder one, reduce unnecessary care, so it leaves more time for necessary care, integrate care and manage resources because then you'll have more ability to scale and innovation, and learn from others' examples. And a lot of us at the podium are so interested to tell you what we think rather than be quiet and sit in the back and learn, which is a much more useful application of my time than lecturing everybody about what I think. The problem you should all think of if you're a clinician or if you seek to go to an academic medical center is, can you do any of this in that environment or in your practice? Because a big part of success is where you actually choose to innovate. So I looked far and wide and found some articles on innovation in surgery by a guy named Thomas Crummell, and some of you may know who he is. He seems to be a brilliant guy from Stanford who was the founder and developer of the Byers Center of Surgical Innovation. And he pointed out in this particular publication on the historical perspective to innovation in surgery that research and innovation are not the same. And in academic medical centers, they kind of have to coexist. Individual surgeons drive innovation. It's not the institution. The institution helps it or impedes it. And that surgeons and hospitals are basically architected to resist change, and it's very difficult to get them to adopt things unless you start elsewhere and bring it to them. And most technological innovations have historically been outside of healthcare and then eventually come to healthcare, not the other way around. So he finishes by saying, and I think this is true, healthcare has been described as the most entrenched, change-averse industry in the United States. And that's why I wanted to learn from other businesses when I went to business school. So those who are surgeons here might like these quotes. Crummell said, "A scientist seeks an understanding, an inventor seeks a solution, and an innovator seeks an application. An entrepreneur seeks independence, autonomy, and control." Sound like an academic medical center to you? "And maximizes the likelihood of success in a risky, defined, or uncertain, ill-defined venture." And he says that sounds like a surgeon to me. So most importantly, and you all know this, you're here because of technology. And you ignore technology, then you do so at your own peril, because that's the future in everything we do. He even dealt with innovation in a university setting, and he pointed out that an innovation is something that has to change established, so you have to be in a culture that allows for change to happen. And culture of organization dramatically affects that potential. And of course, human knowledge is doubling dramatically more than every 12 months. With AI now, it's multiples faster than that. And interdepartment collaboration is essential. So how many of you have had experience with successful collaboration across your departments? That's very difficult. We're very siloed economically in academic medical centers. And I love Atul Gawande's quote, "Culture strangles innovation in the crib." And of course, everybody knows Peter Drucker and Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. So we don't talk about that, but that's really an important part of where we're going to innovate. So the Codman Shoulder Society has become kind of a global expert network. And Codman said, "Give me something different for there's a chance of it being better." So that sounds like an innovator, I would say. And I asked all of the shoulder surgeons to tell me their list of the most important innovations in the last 50 years, and I ranked choice these here. And not surprisingly, you can see that at the top is reverse replacement. And we published this in Rick Matson's book. It's not published in peer review. So I believe and I know what Ozan Varal, who used to be a NASA scientist, says, that we all have confirmation bias. Everybody in this audience is thinking now, do I agree with what he's saying or not? Because we tend to listen more closely to the things we agree with and less so to the things we don't. And it should be the other way around if you really want to learn anything. And when we go to our academic meetings, that's not usually what happens. Gerber pointed out, and he's a brilliant mind, that most of these things that we consider innovations that I learned early on, we take them for granted now. It's kind of interesting to watch how innovations wane and we take them for granted. And then the key is to look for the questions to answer to make the new innovations. And so you're all familiar with Scott's parabola and the diffusion of technology. It also shows you who adopts. And personally, I think that the AMCs tend to be more to the right. But it takes about 16 to 17% of the early adopters to really move a new technology forward so that it gets into the main market and you can now bring it to an AMC. And if you look at what you really want is a curve that keeps growing, and that's Paul Grammont there. Paul Grammont was the person who invented reverse replacement in France. And it came to the United States and has been over-iterated again and again. And by the time it came here, Grammont had had a stroke and was aphasic. So he was an innovator, but not particularly good at being an entrepreneur. So all of you who choose to be entrepreneurs and innovators, you know about Death Valley, and you raise all this money and you struggle and you pivot. And I think that it's this grit, I think, that's necessary for people to be really successful as innovators. Some are really lucky and it scales right away. But you go through this emotional and financial Death Valley, if you will, and you have to do that to get to the next status quo that you're creating. So this is kind of an interesting graph that Gerber sent to me. And if you look on the vertical, that's health, and on the horizontal, that is cost. And so when we innovate value, we're in the steep part of the curve, right? You're creating something that is dramatically improving the care, and the cost issue depends on how much you're improving the care in terms of its value. If you look at the more flat part of the curve, that's a different story. And so over here, we might put cross-linked polyethylene, we might put reverse replacement, and many others outside of shoulder surgery for those who do other things too. But much of what we see now from industry is what would be called sustaining innovations or derivative. And those are moderate redesigns of technology and such. They're not paradigm shifts. And I think we should understand this because we want to be thinking, at least I want to be part of companies that are working on paradigm shifts. Higher risk, but higher reward. So if we look at some people that really embody entrepreneurism and innovation, I think we'd all agree that John Charnley, the creator of modern hip replacement, and Bill Harris, the creator of cross-linked polyethylene, did exactly that. And if you wonder about value, look at this article that he wrote with Arhun Murtoglu that clearly shows that over time, the cost of hip replacement goes down because of the durability, which is the gift you give to the patient. But you're dealing with institutions and individuals that have a timeline for their episode of care that's 90 days, post-acute care timeline. So the value to the institution is over after 90 days. And if they compromise their margin because of the cost of the technology, they're giving away that value to the patient. That becomes an ethical and a financial dilemma. And it's one of the things we see frequently. Another innovator, this is Reinhold Gans, another hip surgeon. Reinhold Gans created an entire area of hip preservation surgery with no research money, no lab, and no grants at the end of his career. And again, he was an innovator, not an entrepreneur. But what he did changed the world for people in terms of their ability to live longer without having a hip replacement. So when we consider all of these people, were they born innovators or did they somehow become innovators? And some people write about, surgeons, do they have the DNA to innovate? It's not true. It's actually they have the behavior to innovate. And I'll get to that in a minute. So if you look at these individuals and what they've done, one thing to remember is they did it when there were lower regulatory barriers than now. There were less barriers in the hospital, but criticism from one's peers is always an ongoing thing. And I think the more criticism you get, the more likely you have something that's going to be really, really good. The less you get, the more it's derivative. Not all innovation is an implant. Remember that as well. So the Meyer Award is the closest thing that we have to the Nobel Prize in orthopedics. It honors Dominique Meyer, who passed from ALS in his 40s, brilliant researcher, and the first winner was Reinhold Gans. I was one of the judges, and it was a multinational judge forum that did this. And look at the title of his innovation speech, Hip Preservation Surgery, Breaking the Rules. And he said innovation is barely possible without breaking the rules. And this goes to where are you doing your innovation? And he pointed out the importance of curiosity, the importance of teamwork. That's how really good teams function. You got to check your ego at the door. So other innovators who changed paradigms, Masaki Watanabe for arthroscopy. Probably many of you don't know Ray Thal. He had the patent for knotless anchors for those who do that kind of surgery. Richard Kaspari, he had, 40 or 50 patents for arthroscopy. And Lanny Johnson was epic. He had the patent for motorized shaver blades, et cetera, et cetera. What's interesting here is the vast majority of these people are in private practice. at least it seems to me that has a lot to do with where they're innovating. If you look at arthroscopy in particular, all these guys here, some other people from Europe and such, they're all in private practice, and that seems to be a trend in the world of arthroscopy. And what I've found, or what I've observed with some of my teachers and former collaborators, these are all young people. You may recognize the names if you're a surgeon. And after the international meeting for shoulder and elbow surgeons, the 16th International Meeting in Helsinki and Stockholm, they went to the Arctic Circle in order to spend time with one another to debate and argue and ask questions. And the relationship where the QA is high, where there are more questions than answers, generally define innovators, because they're more looking for questions than answers. And when we go to meetings, we're more looking for answers than questions. And I think this is why many of the meetings we go to are not particularly innovative. The other thing that's interesting is what's happening right now is a network. And it's important to understand that building a network is also part of the process. So that it's not the number of people you meet, but the number of people you introduce others to, and it's like compounded interest. It's very, very powerful. And the bigger the network you get, the more you connect people. And as you'll see in a moment, connection is really one of the most important factors in innovation. The other thing is, in general, large organizations tend to focus more on delivery, more on incremental innovation. And smaller organizations tend to be more disruptive. That's just how it is. And it was Clayton Christensen that introduced this concept of disruptive innovation, and I'm not going to talk about that because most people don't understand what disruptive means. But he wrote, this book is really important reading if you want to do any kind of innovation in healthcare. And he wrote this article in this book here on the so-called innovator's DNA, which actually makes fun of the fact that it's not really DNA that does it. And in fact, this was based on outside of healthcare. Most companies are looking for who's the most innovative person. In healthcare, that doesn't necessarily count. Who's the busiest guy? Who's going to make the most RVUs? Who's going to bring the most dollars in? And so his metric was looking at 2,500 innovators and 15,000 executives in 75 countries, some of them you see here. And they defined 5 traits that were really inherent to most true innovators and entrepreneurs. And you can read them here. I don't want to read them all to you, but the most important one was associative thinking that brought together disparate ideas from different directions. One of the things we don't do particularly well, I think, in healthcare is to network across different areas to get what works in one place coming to another place that will be more than additive, will be multiplicative of the value you want to create. And does your culture allow that's important? So we finished a study that we haven't yet published at Harvard Business School with Susanna Galani here, looking at culture of innovation based on Christensen's concepts. I'm very proud of it, but it has a little work to be done. And at the end of the day, we license Christensen's surveys that are used for Forbes' ranking of the most innovative companies outside of healthcare. Well, it has healthcare too. But I decided let's try that in an academic medical center. So I had 100% participation by an orthopedic department. And really what it does is it has individuals look at their own predilections, their characteristics, and their organization environment to determine where they work and who they are. And from 30,000 foot, what we found is that individuals that are innovators who have a high discovery score tend to be driven by their own inherent interests rather than anything the institution does for them. And the institutions will have what they call innovations, and most of the people that are not, by their surveys, innovative, participate in innovative institutional things, and the ones that are more innovative don't. And actually, those individuals participate in things more outside their organization than inside their organization, if we're talking about an AMC. And what was really fascinating and surprising to me was that in the scoring metric, these individuals ranked their organization in the lowest percentile as a place to innovate. And while I could guess what the reasons were, we didn't really define them. But you can imagine why they say that. And this fits with what Herzinger has said, that rigid hierarchies and regulatory constraints and risk-averse culture are not a good place to do innovation. So it's just something to think about. And I'm going to finish up with just a brief case study. This is a story of Imiscap, and most people probably don't know what Imiscap was, but I'll show you. Imiscap was a little company that came from Brest, France, which is way over here at the tip of France. It began with a bunch of researchers in 2009 from Telecom Brittany, which was a French engineering school, that were very interested in applying principles of AI to look at how we could improve planning and execution of arthroplasty. And the engine for this, the key player, was Jean Chouy, who is now the head of R&D enabling technology for Stryker, and Gilles Walsh and Pascal Boileau, 2 famous shoulder surgeons. And they asked me to come on board largely because of my relationship with them over the years. And so I want to say one important thing here is that, and I'll say it again at the end, relationships and business go together. because they're the basis for trust. And trust is the basis for leaving your ego at the door. And so I was hired principally to be a business advisor and bring what they had to the US market and help with product development and strategy and our business model. And it was really an interesting journey. So we started out really trying to automate reconstruction of DICOM images at the time when conformists was struggling with something like this. They didn't succeed too well. And basically based on AI imaging processing and computer vision and 3D reconstruction, with the expectation being planning, navigation, and patient-specific instruments and guides. And this was the patent map that we created. And so we have 3 stages in development. Stage 1 was dealing with the question of the glenoid and the problem with the glenoid and anatomical shoulder replacement because durability was a problem. The second one was looking at the anatomy of the humerus for reverse replacement and trying to improve the way we execute that. And the last one was actual creation of implants using a virtual world to do this, rather than cadavers and other models. And our financial approach was basically bootstrapping. And somebody once asked me what one of my reasons for success, and it is, this is being recorded, but my wife will never watch this. I never tell my wife what I invest, okay? And then I just tell her I'm spending her money. And so we did that. We did a combination of licensing to Tournier initially to defray our burn rate. I think we had 2 raises we had to do to get to the finish line. And so if you look here early on in 2016, this was our design. That became one of the most popular arthroplasty for the stem in reverse and anatomical. Here's another one we did. This became the first augmented base plate, at least in our world, that's what we used it for. And this was in 2017, not my term, but somebody, I think it was Gilles Walsh, came up with the term Dream Team. And we met all over Europe in places other meetings were happening, so we were going there and didn't have to pay to be together there with our own money. We went for the meeting. And this was in Val d'Isère, France, many years ago. And what I realized is what we created was a digital platform that drove a hardware pipeline. And I also realized that the intangible assets were just as important as the tangible ones. And as I said before, finding yourself in a room with people smarter than you, this really proved that to me, because I guarantee you almost everybody in that room in this picture was smarter than me. But they needed me for something, which really gave me a purpose. It gave me a reality to how I will add value to a group. And this was the direction we went. And so if you look, and this is all publicly disclosed, Tournier, that company was bought by Wright Medical for $3.3 billion. And then Wright Medical bought Imiscap on the front end of the deal, which was not quite $90 million. There was a lot of back end that I don't have time to go over here. And then Stryker bought us for an enterprise value of $5.6 billion, and now Blueprint, which is what this is called, is the platform for all digital technology that Stryker uses, including robotics, and growing at the same time. And just to give you an insight into what it did and what it's doing, is it allowed you to subtract metal and see what was left and then do your planning. It allowed you to have AI guide what you were doing to make sure you didn't color outside the lines and do something that was ridiculous. And just briefly, because I'm out of time and I just want to give you some insight into how it works so you get an idea in reality how it goes. It allows you in 90 seconds to have a 3-dimensional model of your shoulder and then to do surgery on it and have input from AI about where you're putting things and where you shouldn't put things. So if you will, digital guardrails to what you do. And I think that's one important point here. When you make things safer, when you bend the learning curve, you automatically create value for everybody, the hospital, the patient, the surgeon, et cetera. And that's sort of a good foundation to have for innovation. So I look at it like this. I think you can look at this as a digital episode of care, and you can look at pre-op, intra-op, and aftercare. And you know, the pre-op part you're seeing, everybody's chasing this, everybody's following this, everybody has a virtual plan. The execution part now becomes more difficult because robotics is expensive, it's ungainly, it's hard to use in the ASC, so companies are looking for solutions to that. Other terms of navigation and other ways to navigate it. You know, digital guardrails are going to be really important, but we've largely not paid any attention to the aftercare, and wearable technology and app-based recovery are here now and approved by CMS, and that is another opportunity, I think, in this process. So I'm just going to sum it up with my last slide. 10 points I would make here. First of all, I think timing and context of the market is really important. A clear understanding of your customer and stakeholders, really important. You have to know what problem you're solving at the beginning, because the problem is the beginning and the end of what you're doing. You have to have a strategy that is matched by your financing. You have to have a strategy for where you're going. You're looking to do an exit all at once, or you're going to do verticals in different areas. How are you going to finance as you go forward? What's the past experience of the founder or the CEO? I'm looking at that when I work with companies. What's the quality of the team and what's the chemistry of the team? And the final part of all of this is there a relationship and is there trust? And if there is, you're much more likely to have success than if there isn't. And for those who are more interested, on the left is my day job and on the right is my night job. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic.